Hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of Space for Life. And I'm really excited today to introduce you to a new friend of mine, Ann Smith. And we're just getting to know one another, honestly. But I felt like this was an episode that I felt a strong sense needed to go forward, in spite of us kind of being new friends. And that's probably for a couple reasons. Ann and I were introduced by a mutual friend, Lauren. Shout out to Lauren. And as she connected us, I, of course, went to kind of try to learn a little bit more about her and was drawn to her book, which I'll introduce in a minute, uh, but also to just some amazing endorsements of her book that immediately gave me kind of a confidence level that this is someone that we should hear from, that I should hear from and learn from. And so I'm really excited to introduce you to Ann Smith, and she is the author of newly released book, Recalibrated: How a Green Beret and His Bride Overcame Realities of Combat and a Broken Relationship Through Faith, Hope, and Love. And that's a mouthful, but I love the word recalibrated. And just immediately, I think in that title, you get a sense there is a substantial story behind this book. What I was also drawn to, I think, as I dove down, is some incredibly powerful endorsements from people that you have a sense right on the front end you should pay attention to. So one of the endorsements read like this: their heartache rings true for so many of God's children. And it is my prayer that Ann's example of reliance on the Lord strengthens the spirit of women and girls in Virginia and across the world, promoting light and life in the midst of dark valleys and seemingly insurmountable challenges. And that endorsement came from Suzanne Yunkin, who is the First Lady of Virginia. And much beyond being the First Lady of Virginia, Suzanne and Glenn are really bright lights, incredible people of depth and substance that are worth listening to. The second endorsement, and then I'll get quiet and let Ann speak, is Ann's transformational words, hard won and true, are an invitation to receive the deep hope and joy available when we finally let God lead us through life's good, hard dance. And that's from Catherine Wolfe. And if anybody listening is not familiar with Catherine Wolfe, she has an amazing podcast, and her book, Treasures in the Dark, and her story is a testament of strength and depth to anybody. So honestly, if I heard nothing else other than Catherine's endorsement, I'd say I'm all in on this. So I am really excited to honestly hear kind of for the first time, and your story, and welcome to Space for Life. And I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm just excited to hear the powerful, hard story that you have to tell.
Thank you for having me. And thank you, Lauren, for introducing us. I'm just honored to be here and to share our story. I know our story is not everyone's story, but the God behind it is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so my prayer is that whoever is listening can draw on the goodness of God through that good, hard dance, no matter what they're going through.
Yeah. Well, just in our conversation before we got going, your story is not everybody's story, nor is mine. But I think so many people are going to resonate with walking through hard places, and I think that's a commonality for so many people, even if the particulars are not the same. So perhaps I'd love to begin with pre-book, a little bit of your story and kind of I guess, what led up to the point kind of where the book and the story of the book takes place. So tell us a little bit, I guess, about yourself and what brought you here.
Yeah, well, the book is the story of overcoming PTSD and a very broken marriage through faith, hope, and love.
Okay.
But at the time, I met my husband. We, of course, had no clue about PTSD, and we had rose-colored glasses on, and fell head over heels. We met in a unique place in Afghanistan. He was a Green Beret, and he was deployed, and I was a civilian working with the Department of Defense. I
Oh,
was
wow.
young, adventurous. My background was in conflict, security, and development, so I was living my dream, working to bring peace and reintegration to the communities that uh, had dealt with the Taliban or were trying to reintegrate with people who had put their weapons down. So part of the reintegration program. And so I was in northern Afghanistan, and it was starting to see more Taliban activity. And so Petraeus had ordered an A team, and 30 days later, Nelson's team showed up. And I had been one of the few Americans with boots on the ground in the region where I was working. And so they had asked me to come in and brief them. And I sit down, and his team walks in, 12 big, burly, special forces operators, all wearing beards and none wearing uniforms. It was very intimidating. And sat down, I took one look at him, and I thought, oh no, our eyes met and it was game over.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
of course, in a combat zone, as a female, you have to be very, very careful. Your reputation can be tainted very quickly with rumors. And so it took a long time for us to realize we both had feelings for each other.
Hmm.
But it gave time for a lot of conversation, and we
Was that
haven't
in
stopped talking
Afghanistan though?
in Afghanistan. Yes.
Yeah.
So his
Wow.
team ended up out in the remote areas where I was working with the Swedish, and I was with them in a little town, living within an Afghan compound. And then they would come back for rest and refit. So I would see them come in, body armor and their big vehicles, and the doors would creak open. I'd like, oh, they're coming.
Oh my gosh.
But it was neat. I'll never lose the sense of honor that I got to see him in warrior mode.
Oh, I
Most one of soldiers or special forces or any military members, they don't get to see that side of their husband when they're downrange. They just get the phone calls, but to actually watch, I mean, I got to see them get all kitted up and ready for a nighttime patrol. And I took helicopter rides and
wow.
big vehicle rides, and we went into remote areas together. And so it was very cool, that experience with him.
That's quite a romance story though.
It was. I say we found love in a hopeless place, to
Wow.
quote Rihanna.
Yeah.
But it really was. We fell fast. We fell hard for each other. We really have a heart that I think was knitted together in a beautiful way. But as soon after we got married, he was at Fort Campbell. I moved to Nashville after I left Afghanistan. And we got married, and he redeployed soon afterwards.
What year was
And
this?
this was 2012
Okay.
when I came back. We actually ended up having two weddings, because he got word in December that he was going to this on a very unique mission, and it was dangerous, and they don't recognize fiancés. So we did a quick ceremony with family, and then we were supposed to have a white wedding in May of 2013.
Hmm.
And so
Wow.
we ended up having both. But that was an interesting story, because he ended up, supposed to deploy like January 3rd, and he was on his way to the airfield, and they called, hey, stand down. 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks they called, he would get ready to go, and then he'd stand down. And then finally, about 2 days after our white wedding, he deployed. So actually, that part of the story is not in the book because it was too to try to figure out how to explain what was going on would have been complicated. Um,
Okay.
but
Wow.
he did deploy back 2 days after we did get married, after our white wedding, and was a full deployment. And within early weeks, maybe days, something snapped with this deployment. I think, we had moved to Nashville. His children he was previously married. His ex-wife got remarried and moved the kids to a different state. I had a new job as a teacher, new house, new neighbors. Everything was new. And so I
Mm.
think when things shift, it shows cracks. You realize that maybe the foundation is weak. And so he started to display signs of PTSD, which I call episodes. But it was almost a year later that we realized it was PTSD. And then even longer before we started to get help for it. So
Mm.
things like paranoia or jealousy or the lack of feeling safe or trust, hypervigilance, they started to present in just the way he would question what I was doing or where I was going or who I had been with or what are the motives of the people around me. He's a trained operative, so he's always thinking through the eyes of what are people doing and why are they doing it.
Right. And my impression, which you can tell me whether I'm right or wrong, is that period, that year-long period before you really recognized it was PTSD, that that kind of stage can often be the hardest because you don't have a name to it and you're not recognizing that there's something else going on. It just seems like things are not right, and the inability to define it in some ways can make it even harder. Am I right with that?
Absolutely. You think you have it all figured out. I mean, you're in love. You two people, you love each other, and you're wondering what is happening. And I kept thinking to myself, something's wrong with him. Something happened, or what is going on, or tomorrow will be better.
Mm,
Just need to get through today.
yeah,
Um, and then episodes started getting worse and worse. They became like waves on a beach, just one after the other. And at the same time, I was teaching at a very difficult charter school I mean, it was just extremely demanding on the teachers. And so I was worn down. We're both worn down. And so we're not necessarily responding from the right places,
right.
and just compounds the conflicts. But, I had as I said, my background is in conflict resolution. And I started to lose all ability to deal with conflict in our marriage. I mean, that became a point of just surviving, and feeling like a non-human, and who am I, and what is this, and how do I get through this day? The amount of verbal onslaughts, and the demanding and the questioning. And, you end up going to a place of striving, or I ended up going to a place of striving where I figured I, you know, I have academically, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. Spiritually, I grew up in the church. I know I'm supposed to be praying. I am praying, Lord, fix this situation. Lord, fix Nelson. What's going on? But nothing's happening. And so it was a long, hard fall to the bottom,
Mm,
to hit rock bottom for me. But when I did, I looked up, and the Lord, I mean, Jesus he was like, I'm the only one who can fix him.
mm,
I'm the only one who can fix this. And then he said, but let me start with you. And I'm sitting there thinking, but I'm the victim here. I'm the one who's,
yeah.
trying to
I'm
manage the
not the problem.
situation. I'm not the problem.
Yeah,
And, and so gently and so beautifully, because I was brokenhearted at the time, and a mess.
of
He
course.
very gently led me to realize and to show me the ways that I was adding conflict to the marriage, and the ways that my view of God himself was incorrect, or had been shifted, or was off. Like I was looking at him through rippled water rather than a clear pool. And, ways that I had to, I brought my own weak foundations into the marriage, or false identities into the marriage. And when I say that, I mean the structures we've built in our lives for self-protection and self-defense, just through the normal ways of living and growing up, and the things you deal with high school and college, and showing me how he could realign who I was, who I thought I was, who I thought he was, and then who I saw my husband as. And when I could realign all of that, then I could enter into a place of hope and faith, peace, and I
It's
could learn to love.
so counterintuitive that it would seem from the outside, and probably, well, I don't know how evident it was to other people about his struggles, but if someone heard from the outside, it would just seem so much that it's got to first be about solving, healing, curing, his issues. And
Mm,
that, as you said, that you are just kind of a victim of it, as opposed to being the place where healing began,
right,
that it began with you while he is continuing to deal with these issues, which, weren't brought on by him, but are
right,
expressed through him.
right, right. And eh, when you realize that he was operating out of a place of woundedness, which wounded me, which then I'm responding out of a place of woundedness. And it's just a caustic cocktail, just constantly one's feeding the other. And when you can remove yourself from that and then heal, and you're no longer rooted in the woundedness, but rooted in Christ, then you can see and pray into the situation in a different way. And you can actually be praying, your will be done, Lord. And his will is always for good, and it's to call forth the good in others, and to call forth the true and the right in others. So instead of the dwelling on the whys and the woes, which only comes from that wounded place, I was able to, you know, pull myself. I didn't pull myself. The Lord lifted me out of the muck and the
Yeah.
mire and
That's
said,
a, yeah, that is such a difficult place. I know, our story, as, we talked about it, of, walking through the years of my daughter Perrin's cancer, that created such a woundedness, and the suffering, I think, in being wounded is so intense
Mhm.
that the ability to do anything beyond survive it, and the natural tendency to just simply want to flee it. And, we didn't really have any ability to flee it, other than, I would say, emotionally, we could have, tried to do that. But I'm sure there I would imagine there were a lot of times where it just seems so natural to just want to run away.
Oh yeah, it took everything in me to not. And I think
Sure.
the Lord was gracious. He gave me a word that I knew was from him early on in these dark days, and he said, "Be patient with him. I'm working on him." And it
Mm,
was just a very still, small voice, as you're sobbing on the floor. And I cling to that. And I also knew that I, you know, I knew that I knew that I knew in the depths of my heart that this was not my husband. This was
mm,
not to kill him. And if I ran away, I'm bringing all of my gunk with me at the same time. So I'm going to bring all of this woundedness into whatever new life I was going to try to form.
right.
And on top of that, then ignoring those small voices of, can you be patient? Will you be patient? Will you let me work on him? Will you let me work on you, and then see where you are?
Yeah,
Um,
one of the things that I think about often when people like you, us, and others go through these really incredibly hard trials of life, and we speak about it from the other side, is I think too often people get a sense that, well, if you're Christian, if you believe in God, then somehow that enables suffering to not be suffering. That, well, if you have faith and hope and love, then, those carry you through hard times and make the hard times not hard times. And I think as we did talk just a little bit before, I think the honesty requires us to say, man, suffering is suffering. And I mean, it is painful beyond description, even though God is in it, even though God is working and all those things, it doesn't lessen the tears and the pain and the woundedness of it. And when that's going on for years, that that's a journey that's almost beyond description. And I think of that because I mean, I know of others right now, people that I love and care about that are just in that mire that you talked about. And it just doesn't seem any way out,
right,
and it's been going on for a long time and it seems beyond rescue. And
right.
and it sounds like you were in that place.
Definitely in that place. It's a long and it's a hard road. This the saying, pick your hard. It's hard to leave. It's also hard to stay. But I truly, the point of the book is not to say we were broken. God, we prayed some verses. God healed us. It's that
Mhm.
it is hard when you're in it as a believer, as one who's trying to cling to faith, trying to do, and you're not seeing any results. And he's saying, well, you might never see external results, but can I change you from the inside? Can I change?
Yeah.
That's why the book is recalibrate. Can I recalibrate you so you can see suffering as I see suffering? Can you see pain as I see pain? Can you see the goodness of repentance? Can you see the goodness of basically turning to me and letting me lead you through the valleys?
Yeah, which
Uh,
is a healing that goes far beyond just fixing.
right. And he basically said, if your circumstances don't change, can you still trust me? And that was a really hard question to answer. Like, I I first no, no, I don't trust you, Lord. How can I when this is unbearable? You don't
Yeah.
even feel human.
Yeah.
And that's where he led me, those first few months of my initial journey of healing. I was a teacher and it was summertime, so I had a large chunk of time. And this is not normal for most people, but I could, and I didn't have kids at the time, sit for 3 hours at a time. I would wake up, get my coffee, find my prayer chair, and some days I would just sob over a verse. Some days, one verse I would just write over and over and over again. Some days I would journal and pour out my heart. But that was balm. That was the true balm, is learning to sit at the feet of Jesus and hear his voice and know him and get to know him. Um,
That was totally our experience, both my wife Wheezy and I's experience, that we did this crazy thing of just taking these long hours to really sit with our pain, but sit with our pain with God. And that was, Weezy described it as rehearsing the goodness of God, that we would just spend hours rehearsing the goodness of God to give us just enough fuel to get through the difficulty of the day ahead. And then we would repeat it the next day.
Right, exactly. That's rehearsing the goodness of God. At the time, I'd heard a Anne Lamott, no, it was Anne Graham, yeah, Anne Graham Lamott conversation on the radio, and she called them thunderbolts back, lightning bolts back to heaven.
Hmm.
Like when you find in scripture the promises of God and you take that promise and you send it right back into heaven and say, Lord,
Yeah.
you promised to be
Yeah.
near the hearted. You promised to bring me through. You've promised to hear my voice and to cry. And it's not saying you're going to hear it every day, but that posture of going back to the Lord and saying, this is what you've promised. Make it
Yeah.
happen in your time and in your will, but make it happen. Because he doesn't promise things he's not faithful to do.
Yeah. Well, and it is as we've said, it's so powerful that in a sense God began the healing part of the journey with you, and it sounds like prior to being able to see the healing going on, outside of you. Uh, so that defies the way we would typically go about, resolving conflict.
Right. Right. Well, but I mean, Jesus did say it was very wise, take the log out of your own eye before you go to the
Hmm.
speck. I mean, I was standing there, slamming Nelson in front of the Lord, being like, fix him, fix him. Why aren't you fixing him? And he said, well, let me show you ways that I can fix you. That maybe you need to be recalibrated and realigned and
Yeah.
that you're missing the mark. And so, and when you allow him to do that, that is pursuing peace, right?
Mm.
That's pursuing reconciliation, both with reconciliation with God, reconciliation within yourself, and with others around you.
So I know
Um,
PTSD is very, very complex and difficult. How did his healing begin to show, or how is that affected?
so we had called an emergency session with our pastor, Father Thomas, and he's the first one who said, "Wait a second, you've got hypervigilance, you know, extreme, paranoia, extreme." He would wake up in the middle of the night, not clear a house, as if he was in Iraq. And Nelson didn't realize that was not normal. Father Thomas was like, "Gee, I don't do that. I don't know anyone who does that." And he was like, "Really?" But in the SF community, it's fairly common. And when he said that, it still took a while, months, many, many months before he realized I can't live like this anymore. And he made that first knock on the chaplain's door, which then led to going to the psychologist or army psychiatrist who referred us to the Soldier Center in Clarksville with a Dr. Hurley, who was
Hmm.
one of the leading practitioners of EMDR,
Okay.
and
Hmm.
which is it's they use eye movement. Are
Yes,
you eye movement
I am.
therapy?
I'm sure some who are listening may not be familiar with it, but it's a very specific technique and method to help people deal with trauma. Am I correct?
That Yes, that
Yeah.
is correct. And they use it. You're apparently when you sleep at night, your brain processes the day's events. But when there's something traumatic, it gets stuck like in a rut and it actually can't move forward. It cannot, it doesn't process it. So that memory is as alive in your mind, 20 years later as it is the day it happened.
Hmm.
So your responses will come from that memory point, which is still very alive and wounded. And so what EMDR does is it takes you with through lights and sensors. They lead you back to that memory and then process the memory so that it doesn't have the sting. It's the memory is always there, but the feelings that are attached to that memory that then create
The
how
trauma of it.
right and
Right.
respond in the present day
Hmm.
are are changed.
Wow.
And it was very effective. And Dr. Hurley was a godsend. And he truly he walked us through both. He would meet with Nelson once a week and then meet together for marriage counseling after that.
That's
Uh,
amazing. I'm calling him a godsend, and I know that when you're going through something like what you guys were going through or these deep dark times, there are 100 places that you can go, and 90 of them may not do any good. They may just exacerbate the problem. So, in essence, what we really, really do need is a godsend, a God-directed path towards the person that can do the good while many people can. And it sounds like a, tremendous mercy that Dr. Hurley was there as a kind of a first place for you to go to receive that
Mhm.
kind of help.
Oh, we had him on speed dial. Emergency. Hey, we've got to come in. Can we
Yeah.
be there in 2 hours? But he was from Southwest Virginia, and Nelson was from Southwest Virginia, and he had been a chaplain in the military and had worked with special forces and special forces around the world. So he understood and could speak a language that Nelson could respond to.
Hmm.
We had tried one or two others before that, and it just was
Okay.
like it fell flat. And I had tried on my own, and I can tell you how crushing it is to walk into a counselor's office and then have them look at you and be like, "Why are you still with this guy? Like,
Yeah.
how are they not?" You're thinking, That's not what I need."
Yeah, that's what I mean by the godsend is you going, there are so many paths that are out there that are meant to be paths for
Mm,
good that actually can completely take the opposite direction.
right, right.
Hmm.
I truly believe that when we speak life into something, you're going to see the fruit of life in that person and or in a situation or even in an office place, anywhere you breathe out life, you're going to see the response of that. Or we can breathe out death by
Yeah.
just the way what we say, what we speak. Um,
Hmm.
and I learned that lesson, just the grumbling that it can happen in your heart, in your mouth, with friends. I became very aware of who I shared our story with because
Hmm.
I need people who weren't going to speak life into our relationship. And that speaking life is sometimes speaking the hard. I would call, a friend in the middle of an episode and she would ask the hard questions like, well, not trying to sympathize with me, not trying to make me feel better. Oh, he's going to be, or he's horrible to you. You need to take care of yourself. It was, okay, Ann, well, how are you responding? What
Hmm.
have you, what are the thoughts that are going through your head? How can we make sure that you are doing and speaking to yourself the way the Lord would speak to you, or speaking to your
Yeah.
husband the way the Lord would speak to him?
And those are rare people. Yeah.
Very, but they're gold, and we can all be those people. We just have to
Hmm.
learn to operate outside of our flesh, right? Every day and ask the Lord to be bigger in me than I am in me.
So after the EMDR, you began to really see Nelson come back.
Yeah, it's long and it's a hard road. It's not
Okay.
a quick
Right.
fix. When you realize we both hit rock bottom, then you wake up and you realize, how do we move forward? There's so much pain and
Right.
hurt and brokenness that to overcome, to learn how to forgive, you have to put one step in front of the other. And that you realized how much of it was then learning to walk together again
Yeah.
in a rhythm.
How,
And
how long was the journey from when things kind of first began to deteriorate to a point where not that everything was all fine, it's almost never that way, but to where you felt like, wow, we have our life back. How long was that period?
probably 5 years, close to
5 years
5.
is a long time. It is.
It's, but it's, I say it's like waking up the first spring day when you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, it's light out.
Yeah.
And you don't,
Yes.
you, but every day it's gotten a little lighter and a little lighter and a little lighter. And it's just that moment when you realize. And so I would say that was our healing. Walking out our healing was every day was maybe 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but the light, there was room for that light to grow. And so
Yeah.
it was very slow.
Sure. And then
If
all of
I
a
missed
sudden
it,
you wake up one day and you go, this kind of
oh,
feels like spring.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, wow,
Yeah.
we haven't dealt with an episode in a while. Or
Yeah.
I actually managed that. You can still have triggers. You can be healing, and still have triggers that you have to and deal with. And realizing, okay, wow, that didn't push me in the direction I did. I used to have, or I
Sure.
didn't have the response this time around.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, that's great. Uh, I got a real sense just talking to you early on that your book, Recalibrated, is something that's very needed in that it has a level of honesty with truth that's needed for those that are going through really difficult times. So, my encouragement to those listening is that we're just touching the surface, I think, in a little bit of our conversation here. And, particularly if someone's listening and they're in that mire and they're in that suffering, and maybe it's gone on for a good while, that there's a lot of healing wisdom in, I think, what you're offering. As I kind of think about closing our conversation, I'd love to just hear a couple of thoughts from your perspective of if someone's in that place of of real darkness and in a sense what feels like total hopelessness. What would be the one or two things that you would encourage for that person?
mm, that the promises of God are real and they are true, and we can have hope because of that. And so cling to those promises and don't look for miraculous healings. Just do the hard work of seeking peace and then pursuing it. Putting that one foot in front of the other and asking the Lord, start with me. What needs to change with me
Hmm.
and the other person?
That's
And
such
then
a
let him do his thing. Give him time to do what the Holy Spirit will do.
Yeah, that's such a good non-obvious word because, even in seeking the promises of God, the first indication is to think of those promises as just trying to back God into a corner to fix things, and to seek the promises of God, which include trusting Him with the pain and the suffering. That's a really difficult thing, but it also it's a very freeing thing, and somehow we can peace and suffering are not mutually exclusive.
Exactly, right. And you can have peace in the midst of that storm.
Yeah.
Have
Mm.
it by keeping your eyes on Jesus. Like Peter, the minute he took his eyes off, the storm started to pull him down and he started to drown.
Yeah.
Right. So you can have it.
Yeah.
It takes work. It's not a quick fix. There's nothing besides practice and just forcing yourself to do it sometimes. It doesn't even seem reasonable.
Sure. And I would want to say, I know there are people who listen to Space for Life that are not in that place of faith. They haven't walked that path, and they're not even sure if they believe that path to be true. Um, my encouragement would be even in that place to take the risk of stepping forward into a place, even if you don't know,
Yes. Right.
even if you don't believe it will be true, that God will show up in any way to still step there. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to have faith that you don't have or hope that you don't have to still step forward in that way. So, I think these words apply to all of us wherever we are in that journey along the
Yeah.
way.
Right.
Mm.
Because even if you don't know Jesus yet, or you don't know fully who God is, even just the longing or the wanting to, he's going to respond. You give him a needle point worth of space, and he's going to come in and show you his goodness and his mercy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. I do feel like we just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg, but I think there are going to be a lot of people who want to learn more about your story and read your book. How can people connect with you?
Sure. My website is annwsmith.com.
Okay, and
You
that's Anne with an E.
Ann with an E. Yes, Ann with an E, smith.com.
Okay,
You can order the book any books are sold.
okay,
And
great.
so you can order from the website or Amazon or from Aspo Press,
Yeah,
anywhere,
and
books, Barnes and Noble.
you can find it with simply the word recalibrated.
That's
There's
correct.
all of
Yep.
the additional part, but you don't have to remember all of that. So if you just look for Anne with an E Smith recalibrated, you'll find that. So,
Yeah.
well, that's
There's a
great.
picture of me on it looking over the desert.
Oh my goodness.
The picture from when I was in Wadi Rum in Jordan.
As
So
an
that was
author,
great.
it's those things that you never imagined happening within your life, and a picture on a book, or things like that. These journeys that are beyond our imagination that become our lives. So,
Exactly. Right.
well,
I'm in for the adventure.
yeah. Well, thank you, Anne. Thank you for just sharing very honestly. I know it's a very vulnerable place to be in, that you've been willing to do. And as we spoke before we started recording, you know, writing the book is an act of obedience, and so I totally get that. So thank you for sharing with me and with, all those who are listening, your story. And I know the story is continuing and there's a lot more ahead. So thank you so much for being a guest on Space for Life.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Well, please, everybody, even if you're not in that mire, my guess is there are very, very few of us who don't know someone that's, in a space that Anne's story and the lessons that she's learned, wouldn't be highly applicable. So share this episode with others, share the book with others, and look forward to talking again next week. So thank you, everybody. Look forward to talking next week. Bye bye.